Welcome to Love and Abuse, the show about helping you identify poisonous communication and toxic behavior. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. That's why it's important that you learn to pinpoint manipulative and controlling behavior so that you keep your power and your sanity. I'm your host, Paul Coliani. Welcome to Love and Abuse. Glad you are here. All the information on this show is meant for educational purposes only. Always seek a professional for your mental health and well-being. And always pick your battles wisely. So what is a battle that you may have but you may have had with someone or may be having with someone now? Is it emotional abuse? Is it psychological abuse? A mental strain on the relationship, and you can't necessarily pinpoint exactly what the behavior is, but you know you feel it. I mean, it is a mental strain on the relationship regardless, but when you access your feelings and access your thoughts and you think, wow, what they just said, it didn't feel very nice. It sounded like they were annoyed with me. And when that happens, how do you respond to it? What is your response? What do you say? What do you do? And what should you say? What should you do? What is a healthy response? I like to talk about how to respond and how to communicate and how to interact in the most healthy way possible. Basically, any response or anything that you do that doesn't have toxic elements. A toxic element causes someone to feel bad in some way. And they may not be doing it intentionally or consciously, but these toxic elements can make it into our relationships. And when they do, we need to have a healthy response so that a relationship doesn't spiral out of control into what might be avoided, like an emotionally abusive relationship that may have formed if we hadn't responded in a healthy way, if that makes sense. The idea is to catch it while it's happening so that it doesn't spiral into the depths of emotional abuse or any type of hurtful behavior. How do we do that? Where am I going? What I'm saying is that sometimes these passive-aggressive comments and behaviors that people make aren't addressed in a way that gets it out in the open and gives you an opportunity to talk with each other about it. This is especially a concern or something to be observant about in a new relationship. If you have a new relationship or a fairly new one, maybe a year old, 2 years, fairly new, if these behaviors, these annoyances, these irritations, these frustrations start to come out, what do you say? What do you do? So I'm going to give you what I believe to be the most healthy way to respond to any type of behavior that makes you feel bad. I mean, my definition of emotional abuse is doing things that make someone else feel bad, and especially makes them feel bad about themselves, makes them question themselves, makes them not trust themselves. And when you do things, and there's a lot in that bucket, but when you do things that cause someone to feel bad, that puts a definite strain on the relationship, and it certainly can spiral out of control and become more and more of that compound effect of emotional abuse, which I've talked about before, where emotionally abusive behavior is like a drip feed day after day after day that compounds and gets worse, because even though the behavior may not get worse, the constant repetition of very similar or the same behaviors will wear you down and wear you out. So emotional abuse is that drip feed compound effect of repeating behaviors. And it's not always easy to tell what those behaviors are. This is exactly why I created the MEAN workbook, so you can pinpoint those behaviors. But it's important that when you can't pinpoint it, that you have some sort of response. So I'm going to get right to some of the responses that I'd recommend right now. And this comes from an email that somebody sent me. It's a little long, so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I am going to condense it here and summarize what they're saying. They said it was a new relationship, less than a year. They broke up, and she said she did see some of the signs of emotional abuse and didn't see the other signs and wasn't sure if those were abusive behaviors or just typical relationship issues. One of the first things she said is that they both agreed that it was fate that brought them together. They were fated. She put the word fated. And I always see that as a warning sign. And I hate to say that because I've been there. I've been in a situation where it did feel like, wow, this is fate that brings us together. This is so meant to be. When it's that early on in a relationship, all the chemicals are going through your body and everything is just so wonderful and new. It worries me. I'm skeptical when I hear somebody that says this was meant to be when it's that early, because we often put on our best face in the beginning of a relationship. We often put on our best behavior. Not everyone. I mean, some people show up as they are. But if they're abusive, if they have a tendency to hurt people, whether consciously or not, then they're not going to show you that side of them at the beginning. They're not going to do that because they want to impress you every step of the way. And impress is the wrong word. They want to show you that they're safe, that they care about you, that they love you, and they want you to feel like you can trust them with anything and everything. Healthy people do this too. I'm not knocking down those qualities. I'm not making it sound like anyone who you feel this way with is somebody that you should watch out for. I'm not saying that at all. But I am saying when you feel all of these things early on in a relationship, that it's important to step back and look at the big picture and find out if everything is so perfect that it might be a little too good to be true. I'm not saying it can't happen. Absolutely. I'm not saying it can't happen. But I like to gauge relationships in a way where if everything is so good to the extreme, like perfect and fated, F-A-T-E-D, then what you're looking at may have a limit. It may have a finite period of time of existing. It's sort of like looking at happiness. Let's just say that you have this blissful feeling. You are happy. Something is making you so happy. How long does that last? I'm talking about the extreme amount of happiness. You are so happy. You're laughing. How long does that happy, laughing feeling last? It doesn't. That feeling doesn't last, just like most feelings don't last. And I'm not talking about a chronic depression or chronic sadness or anything like that. I'm not talking about anything chronic. It's always the negative feelings that are chronic, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the general emotions that we experience on a day-to-day basis. You could be thrilled about something, but that thrill calms down. It goes away. You reach a homeostatic state. You have a level place, a balanced place where you feel where you're in the middle between all the emotions. When you're in the middle, that is your balance point. That is your ground floor, I guess you could say. And then sometimes you go in the basement because you're sad, and sometimes you go in the attic because you're happy. And maybe those aren't the right analogies for you, but you get it. Sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down, and then hopefully most of the time you're centered, you're balanced. It's not normally that way in emotionally abusive relationships because you're always on edge. You're always thinking what is going to happen next. You're always wondering what you should do. That can create a bipolarity in your emotional state. I'm not saying it causes bipolar disorder or anything like that, but it can create that up and down emotional state that just you're always walking on eggshells in some way, shape, or form. So because that's the case, comparing an emotionally abusive relationship to a, quote, normal or healthy relationship isn't a fair comparison, because a, quote, normal or healthy relationship, there's healthy communication. There's more transparency. There's more vulnerability. In the emotionally abusive relationship, there is, how do I show up next? What do I expect next? There's always that unfinished business, that open loop in the relationship, and you never get closure. It's like you're waiting for the next hiccup, and it never comes, but you know it's coming. And you know it's in there. That hiccup is coming, but it doesn't come. But you know it's there. And then you get a hiccup, and then you think, okay, I got that hiccup, but then the next one is on the way. And so this is somewhat the cycle of emotionally abusive relationships, is that you're always waiting for the next thing to happen or fearing the next thing happening. You're just on edge in so many ways. I probably don't have to tell you that. That's exactly what a lot of people experience. But back to fate. When somebody says we're meant to be together, it's fate, and it's early on in the relationship, you do have to be careful that it might be at the extreme end of the pendulum swing. It's the high of the relationship, where everyone is acting on their best behavior and really wants to impress the other person. Again, not everyone does this, but if that has happened to you or is happening to you, you just have to step out of it. You have to step back and look at it. Look at the big picture. Can everything be this perfect? Can everything be this ideal? Are there no issues that you disagree on? And can you have healthy disagreements? And can you have disagreements without hurting each other or them hurting you? So just be aware of this questioning process when you feel like it's meant to be. And I don't mean to deflate anyone's sails. I don't mean to make you feel like, oh, this may not be what it is. I want you to move forward with a healthy amount of skepticism and continue to be your wonderful, caring, loving, supportive, generous, compassionate self until you notice that things aren't as they appear. If you notice that things aren't as they appear. I'm just priming you for being clear in yourself so that you don't get lost in the weeds. These weeds can get very high, and you will not be able to see above them because you will have trouble navigating through them. You'll be in the weeds trying to get out of them, but you never do. And when you're in that deep, it's very difficult to get to a point where you can get out so you can see again. So like I said, and I know I strayed off a little bit, but I want to give you some healthy responses to what can happen when somebody throws out these little, sometimes hurtful comments, or you're not sure how to take it. Like this person who said, the person she was dating said, "Why are you walking in front of me?" Just out of the blue. Why are you walking in front of me? It wasn't a joke. It was meant to be serious. And she thought, we never had a conversation where I couldn't walk in front of you. I mean, I'm putting words in her mouth now, but I imagine this is exactly what she was thinking. Is it a problem that I walk in front of you? That's what I'm thinking too. Is it a problem? And that can be something that you say to somebody who comments something like that. That can be something that you say to someone, though it does sound a little bit aggressive. Like, is that a problem? So you probably don't want to say it that way, but you could ask the question, does it bother you when I do that? And it's an innocent question. And you may not get a very calm answer, because if they're already irritated by something, that question might irritate them more. But it is a good question. Does that bother you? And you don't want to say it sarcastically. You don't want to say it as if you're being mean, and you probably wouldn't say it that way. But I want to make sure that I'm coming across as innocent and even naive as I could be if I was in that situation. Like if my girlfriend said, "Why are you walking in front of me?" I would have to think, wow, she sounds upset. I would ask the question, does it bother you that I'm walking in front of you? Now, at the same time, I might make an assumption. Like maybe walking in front of her makes her feel like I'm blocking her, like she can't see what's coming. So, like most people, we're going to make these assumptions. My assumption might be that, am I doing something that if she were in front of me and she were taller than me, because I'm taller than my girlfriend, so if she were taller than me and I couldn't see, then what would I say then? What would I say? So I try to empathize and put myself in her shoes. So in this case, I would definitely ask this person the question, does it bother you when I do this? Or you can even ask, do you want to share with me why that bothers you? Because there is an assumption being made that it does bother the person, especially how they asked. You can always hear if something is bothering somebody with the inflection of their voice. Doesn't mean I'm always right about that, but for the most part, you can hear it. There's a difference between saying, hey, would you mind not walking in front of me? A very low inflection. Or, why are you walking in front of me? I'm louder. The frequency of my voice raised. The tempo of my voice increased. So there's certainly a way to tell when somebody's annoyed or irritated. Would you say, are you annoyed? Are you irritated that I'm walking in front of you? You could. That would usually lead to conflict, not always, but that does sound like a question that might lead to conflict. Are you annoyed? Even if you were very kind about it, does it annoy you that I walk in front of you? There's an air of conflict in there that might cause the conversation to go in a bad way, which is why I like the second one that I said, do you want to share with me why it bothers you? Now, they may say, it doesn't bother me. If that's the case, you could ask, well, you sound bothered. I apologize if I misunderstood that. If it doesn't bother you, then I'm just going to ignore it and continue walking. Maybe that's where the conversation should go. And this is tricky because you're walking a fine line. You know something's wrong. You feel it. Don't discount it. Don't discount it, because as soon as you discount it, that's the compound effect of what can make the relationship, or at least your communication, spiral downward. You don't want to dismiss the feelings that you have. That felt kind of rude. That felt kind of hostile. So don't dismiss that. Just note it. That felt hostile. And then ask a question. You don't want to let it go. I believe you don't want to let it go unless they are hostile and aggressive, and every time you address something, they're still hostile and aggressive. But then I would ask you, why are you in a relationship where you can't even communicate with somebody because they're always hostile and aggressive? I know sometimes you can't get out of a relationship like this. You have a lot of ties, you have a lot of commitments, but you do have to wonder how long you're going to spend with somebody that you can't even talk to. I'm just giving you food for thought. I personally, and I'm not trying to push this on you, but I personally wouldn't want to be with somebody that I couldn't have a conversation with. Now, maybe 90% of the conversations are great, and that's why you're there, and that's why it's okay. Perfectly fine. I don't like to push anyone to leave anyone. I like to promote healthy conversation. So if you're not able to have a healthy conversation, or at least one without hostility, then that is a problem, because now you're not really relating to each other. You're not meeting each other in the same space. One person is trying to have a conversation and the other one is just trying to be aggressive or dominant or whatever they're doing, controlling. So we just have to, again, make sure we don't dismiss the feelings that come up when somebody has an aggressive or hostile or some change in their inflection that makes it sound like they're annoyed or frustrated. We want to find out what is bothering them. And that is another question. What is bothering you? What's going on? And you have to gauge this if it's going to work in your relationship. What's bothering you might not work in your relationship. What's going on? That might be a little bit more generic. Whoa, what's going on? You sounded a little bit irritated that I was walking in front of you. And they may say, well, you always walk in front of me, so it bothers me. And then you have a conversation from there. Oh, I didn't know it bothered you. I'm sorry. And that might be one of 10,000 different things that bother them. It could be. It might be one of those people that just gets annoyed at a lot of stuff. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, actually, because there are people like that. But that's one thing you can say. Does that bother you, or do you want to share with me why that bothers you? Another example she gave is that she was with her partner, and her partner said, "Why do you always move so far to the right when a bike passes?" And she did not respond. And there's another one that probably had a lot of inflection in it. Why do you always move so far to the right when a bike passes? This person sounds annoyed. They sound frustrated, like the person who wrote to me is doing a lot of things that annoys this person. And I am a big fan of addressing things as they come up and not letting them build. And this is a specific event that should be addressed as soon as possible. You have to identify the feelings that you get. Oh, that didn't feel very good. That's all you have to say. That didn't feel very good. I mean, you may know what the feeling is. You may know what the emotion is. That made me angry. That made me confused. And then after you say, okay, that didn't make me feel very good. I have this feeling about it. I believe it's important to address it. Because after you have this feeling, you might think, what just happened? What did I do wrong? That's often where the victims of emotional abuse go, is that they think they did something wrong. It's not that you're doing something wrong. It's that they're not conveying clearly what is annoying them. I want you to catch that. It's not that you're doing something wrong. It's that they're not conveying clearly what frustrates or annoys them. That means that you don't automatically go into blame yourself mode. You don't have to blame yourself. You just have to find out what is bothering them. So another question you can ask when something like that happens, aside from does it bother you, or do you want to share why that bothers you, is why do you ask? That was answering a question with a question. Her partner said, "Why do you always move so far to the right when a bike passes?" The answer to that could be, why are you asking? That's a good question because it puts them on the spot. I mean, if they're going to have this frustration and annoyance, then it's good for the relationship for it to come out, for it to be expressed, so that it is not held in. Why are you asking me that? And then you could also say, does it bother you? Why does it bother you? That could be where the conversation goes. And I know sometimes these questions won't work. Sometimes these questions will lead to more annoyance. If that happens, then I go back to my question, why would you want to be with somebody that you can't even have a conversation with? And I'm not saying that you should leave. I'm not saying that you should get a divorce if you're married. I'm not saying that the only solution is to get out of the relationship. Not at all. I'm saying that maybe that could be something that you could mention as part of trying to communicate with your partner or loved one. You can bring up, it seems that we can't have a normal conversation. It seems like whatever I do, it annoys you or frustrates you. So maybe we should talk about this. Maybe I'm doing something that bothers you, and let's talk about that, because I don't mean that. I don't want to do that. And I'm not saying you should take the blame. I'm saying that we give the other person a chance to express themselves, and that might be the way to do it. If they're really annoyed, they're really agitated, then we want to get them into a safe place for them to express themselves. I mean, you don't have to, but this is my recommendation if you want to continue with the relationship. So you open the door and say, hey, look, I know something's bothering you. Let's talk about this. Let's put it on the table. Let's be honest with each other. What's bothering you right now? Hopefully you can have a conversation. Because when I ask the question, why would you want to be with somebody that you can't even have a conversation with? The conversation has to change. You can't continue having the type of conversation that always feels like you're annoying the other person. That's no way to live. That's no way to feel. You should be free to be yourself, or at least express yourself, so that it can be discussed. And discussion requires healthy communication of some sort. And of course, people get angry, people get upset. It happens in every relationship. but it shouldn't be a constant bombardment of upset. It shouldn't be, no matter what you say or do, it's annoying to them. Which is why it's important to address these things as they come up, each event as it happens. Why does that bother you so much? And hopefully you get to a solution. But I know the majority of people that listen to this show, they can't have healthy conversations. They've tried this stuff. They're listening to me right now. Maybe you are listening to me right now saying, I've tried that. It doesn't work. This brings me back to that same question. Why would I want to have a relationship where I can't even have a conversation with somebody? That doesn't mean you're unlovable. It doesn't mean you're not worthy. It doesn't mean you're not important. It just means this isn't working. It's not working. So we need to either do something to make it work, which might mean having a tougher conversation. Look, I've tried, and no matter what I do, you're always upset, so I don't know what else to do. I don't know how to make you happy. That could be it, or not. That could make it worse. I know. And again, pick your battles wisely. If you say this to an aggressive or a violent person, it's definitely not going to go well. But most relationships, you should be able to have a conversation. And the healthier, the better. And all that healthy means is the more truth that comes out, the better. And truth spoken in a way that doesn't mean to hurt the other person. There's a big difference when you say, what you just did makes me feel like you don't care about me, versus you are a big jerk. There's a big difference there. Because you are a big jerk, it could be true, but it's not helpful. It's not healthy. You are a big jerk doesn't say what you just said makes me think that you don't care about me. And that expresses something that can be addressed. They may not be able to address you're a big jerk, but they can address the comment, it makes me think that you don't care about me. And hopefully they say, yes, I do care about you. Okay, well, what you're doing doesn't feel like you care about me. So maybe we can talk about this. Maybe something needs to change so that I know that you care about me, because it doesn't feel that way now. And someone who cares about you wants you to know they care about you. They want you to feel cared for. That's what a, quote, normal, healthy relationship is supposed to look like. That's my perspective, but I believe that's what a healthy relationship is supposed to look like. Another example that this person who wrote said is her partner said, you've been wanting my attention since you got here. And so when I hear that, you've been wanting my attention since you got here, I would think in a healthy relationship that giving someone attention was part of connection and part of bonding. And so it would confuse me. I would have this confusion if my girlfriend said this. She said, you've been wanting my attention all day. Okay, where do I go with that? That's a question. Does it bother you that I want your attention? That might be a question I ask. Or can you share with me why wanting your attention bothers you? Or how is that a problem? That might be something you say. Depends on how you communicate now with the other person. I might even say, the way you just said that doesn't make me feel all warm and fuzzy. Doesn't make me feel like something that somebody would say if they were in a relationship with somebody. It doesn't feel like a caring, connecting comment. It feels like it annoys you. Does it annoy you? And the answer might be, well, it annoys me because when I'm doing something and you're in my face or you're in my space, it bothers me. So I need some space. Which, again, there might be truth there, so let's have a talk about it. Oh, okay, so when you're in this room, or do you just need like an hour or two a day, or how do you define this so I can give you your space? Because I like to have my space too. So I definitely understand that we all need our space. And if I'm always in your space or always in your face, I certainly want to know about it. And I definitely want to honor what you need for you. So what you're doing is you're giving them the benefit of the doubt, which you probably do a lot of anyway, but this is part of the process. Is you don't immediately go into blame mode like there's something wrong with them. You try to understand their perspective. Okay, so you need some space. No problem. Should I ask if you need space? That might be something you do. When I want to connect with you, I can ask if you need your space. And they may say, yeah, that would be great. Okay, so that could be the turnout. Or they may just be annoyed all the time. They may be one of these people, which I mentioned earlier, that is constantly playing the victim. Like they're always on the edge of their seat, like in fight or flight mode, as if they believe the world owes them something and that everyone's against them. If you want to know if somebody's going to be abusive, look for their annoyance and upset about everyday normal things. Most people wouldn't be upset about everyday normal things. But the person playing the victim, everything annoys them and just stay out of my way, get out of my face. I don't want you to be around, and no matter what you do, it's never good enough. If that's the case, then they may be that type of person. They may be wired that way. Doesn't mean they can't change their wiring, because people can. A lot of people can, unless they're diagnosable, but a lot of people can change who they are and how they show up, because they just don't realize that they're showing up in a certain way. They're still in blaming the world mode because the world is against them. So when you're dealing with somebody where the world is against them all the time, you're not going to win, but it is important to find out exactly how you're violating whatever value or boundary that they're putting out there, because they are not being clear in their communication with you. So somebody has to be clear in their communication. You have to be clear if they're not being clear. Saying something like, you always need attention. That's not very clear. What do you mean by that? That might be another question. What do you mean by that? And I think I asked that same question on a recent episode, where you need to get the facts. That's what I said in that episode. I think it was the previous one to this. You need to get the facts. What are the facts? If you don't have the facts, you are walking around interpreting things. So when this person says their partner said, you always need attention, what does that mean? That might be my question. What does that mean? What do you mean by that? And hopefully they'll explain it. And it's probably going to be an exaggeration. I always need attention. I don't think so. I'm not saying you say that, but it's probably not true, because it's a generalization that you always need attention. No, you probably might like attention every now and then, and you're not getting any. So in order to get some, you want to connect. You want to visit with them in the room they're in, or hopefully they'll look away from the TV for a moment to connect with you, or from their phone. But if you're not getting it, then it's important to say, hey, I would like to connect. Will you take the time to connect with me? Or I would like to connect on a daily basis, just for a few minutes, just so we can bond. Or something like that, because you definitely have needs in the relationship that should be being fulfilled. And if they're not, maybe you're not with the right person in the relationship, or maybe you didn't convey what you really needed and hoped that they would be able to meet those needs. And at the same time, maybe they don't want to. These are the kind of hard conversations that we need to have, just so that there is nothing left over. That lingering negative emotional state that I talked about before, when you don't have the answers, that lack of closure, not having the facts. In order to move forward past an event so that you don't hold on to that event, the negative emotions around that event, it's important to ask the right questions. Does that bother you? How does it bother you? Do you want to share how that bothers you? And things like, why do you ask? And what do you mean? This is sort of a recap of the episode where I talk about getting the facts, but I'm giving you some good examples that give you an idea of how a relationship can go into a downward spiral by bypassing opportunities to talk about something, only because we might be stuck in a place of, well, that just might be a fluke. We might be saying that to ourselves. That might be a fluke, or maybe I took that wrong. Maybe I misunderstood it. And when we do that to ourselves, this is how it builds up. This is how the relationship becomes more and more toxic. And it's important that we are able to communicate when we have certain feelings and have a conversation that hopefully leads to a resolution. Most people that listen to this show don't get their resolution. Most people that listen to the show might ask questions like this and get into the weeds so deep because the other person doesn't want to connect at that deep level. They don't want to access maybe some fears or insecurities they have inside of them. So they turn it back over to you. They give you the baton so that you can run with it instead of having to take responsibility for their own behavior. In other words, they don't want to visit the pain or the fear or the insecurity inside themselves because they don't have the coping mechanisms to deal with it or something. So they turn it back over to you so that they don't have to deal with it. I mean, that is, I would say, a majority of emotional abuse, is that the person does not have the coping mechanisms to deal with what's going on. So they make you the primary focus and make you focus on yourself and not on them by making you believe you're wrong, making you feel guilty, making you feel responsible for all the relationship problems, and on and on and on. They cause you to focus on yourself. I talk about that in another episode called The Turnaround Game. They want you to focus on yourself so that they aren't in the spotlight. If they're not in the spotlight, then the problems never get resolved. And the problems continue to come your way. And that's why you need to have some of these conversations when something happens. And I know this person who wrote said, what do you do about all this little stuff that you can't tell if it's emotionally abusive and they're just little annoyances or irritations to the other person? You just find out, what about those things are irritating? What about me walking in front of you bothers you? It sounds aggressive when I say it, but it's really, you just want to find out the information. You just want to find out. So the way I'm telling you to ask is the most passive way I can think of to have a conversation, especially without blaming them, without making them think they're wrong for thinking the way they are or reacting the way they are. That's another thing we want to avoid, is trying to make the other person wrong instead of just asking questions, finding out where they are. I had an episode, it might have been in The Overwhelmed Brain, my other podcast, on passive-aggressive people. Passive-aggressive people, when they are being passive-aggressive, you need to put them back in the spotlight, because passive-aggressiveness makes you think about yourself. It makes you think, well, what did I say wrong? Or they made me feel this way. Now I'm thinking about myself. And I'm also thinking that I'm upset with them, but it's still about me being upset at them. So how do I get out of this passive-aggressive cycle where they're passive-aggressive and I don't know how to deal with it? You just turn it back on them by asking a simple question. What did you mean by that? I love that question. What did you mean by that? It always forces someone into a position that they have to express what's going on at a deeper level. They may not ride that wave. If they're passive-aggressive, they're going to find a way to divert your attention again or redirect the conversation. But it is a good question. What did you mean by that? That way you'll understand what they meant, because the passive-aggressive person doesn't want to tell you what they mean. That's why they're passive-aggressive. If my wife, when I was married, if she said that to me, if she asked me that question, what did you mean by that? I would be so afraid to be hurtful toward her. I would be so afraid to say the things I used to say to her, because she would be immediately turning it back on me. It would be something that I would have to figure out. I would have to either stop being the person I was, because I was judgmental and critical back then, and I would realize that she's on to me. That's what I would think. I was like, she's on to me. I better not say those things anymore. I'm not saying it would have turned me around. I'm not saying that I would stop being emotionally abusive, but I certainly would have to think really carefully about what I'm doing and how I'm showing up. And I would also realize that she sees through me more than I realized. And I would also see that she is standing up for herself. And these are things that she did a lot of. I mean, she was a very strong, powerful woman in many ways, but I was also very good at making her feel bad. And that's something that she definitely didn't deserve. And I do wish she had the tools to put me in my place back then. This is something that can really help in certain emotionally abusive relationships, is that if the victim of emotional abuse puts the other person in their place and saying, look, I don't like your behavior, you need to stop it or I'm out of here, that can change a lot of people. That's something you do if you're ready for some sort of closure, because this could lead to a closure, it could lead to a better relationship, or it could lead to the end of the relationship. But you reach a tipping point or a breaking point where you say, look, I've had enough. The way you're treating me is awful, and I don't want to feel this way anymore. So either stop it or I'm out of here. It's a simplified way to get to the core of the issue. And the core of the issue is this person has taken away your power and you want it back. And a comment like that, if you don't stop, I'm out of here, it takes your power back. I'm not saying you should say this, because when you say this, it could be a relationship ending conversation. But sometimes you reach that point. Sometimes you have to reach that point in order for things to change. Because I'm here to tell you that a lot of emotionally abusive people don't change until they realize you're serious. You're serious about what? Accountability. When they believe they really will be held accountable for their behavior, that's when you're sure to see a big change. The problem is you don't know which change you're going to see. You may see someone say, well, fine, I'm out of here. I can't stand you anyway. They may say something final and hurtful like that. Or they may say, you're not serious, and then you got to show them you're serious. That could happen too. Or they could get mean. They could become very hurtful. And are you prepared for any of this? I mean, who's prepared for any of this? I don't know. But you reach a point where it's either you continue getting what you get or you do something different, because you will notice that a lot of people that are hurting you don't do anything different. And if they are doing something different, it's because they are choosing to make a radical change. And that radical change is necessary in order to stop being hurtful. This is something I teach over at healedbeing.com. In order to stop being emotionally abusive, you have to become a different person. I'm talking to anyone that has been hurtful to the person they care about. You can't show up as the exact same person. You have to be different. They have to be able to not recognize who you are. It has to be a total shock to them. They're going to ask the question, who are you? And what did you do with this person? They need to be surprised by the change in behavior. That's how radical the change needs to be. But so often, emotionally abusive people do not take the radical step. They take tiny little steps, and they'll say things like I used to say, I'm working on it. And even though I was saying that, I really wasn't going anywhere. It wasn't happening. I wasn't taking those huge leaps that I needed to take. I wasn't stopping all the bad behavior. I felt like since we were still together, then it wasn't so important that I needed to do this with any expedience. I just went at my own pace. And doing that continued to deteriorate the relationship, because the behavior that I was showing her, the behavior that I was showing up with, was damaging to her and the relationship. So it needed to stop right away. If I had stopped right away, there might have been a chance for my marriage to last. But it didn't. And it didn't because I didn't take her 100% serious until she had enough. I pushed her to that limit, and I didn't even know I was doing it. I didn't know that she was falling out of love with me and closing her heart so tight that I could never get back in. And that's what happened. And that needed to happen. Quite honestly, that needed to happen because I wasn't getting the message. It wasn't coming through. And the day we separated, or at least a few weeks after we separated, I finally got it because I was alone long enough to realize, oh, I'm the common denominator for all the relationship problems. I get it now. But I didn't have that thought while we were together because we were together. And I believed as long as she didn't leave that it was going to last and I didn't need to hurry things along. I didn't know that I had to take it so seriously that if I didn't change in a radical way that she would leave. I didn't know that. And so I never took it as seriously as I should have. I just thought, as long as she sees me going through the motions, and I was going through motions, but not all the motions, and not fast enough, and not big enough that I should have done. The hurtful behavior should have stopped, but I didn't have healthy coping mechanisms. I didn't sign up for therapy. I didn't talk to anyone about it. I just did my own little things, hoping that the relationship would get better and that she would see these tiny improvements and that we could work our way up and out of what happened. But I never addressed a lot of my emotional triggers, and I never stopped the hurtful behavior. So that's what led to the end. And that's what led me to go on this mission to never, ever be this person again. And I knew it required a radical shift, a radical change in the way I show up. And pretty much overnight, after the marriage ended and I came to all these realizations about myself, I went from judgment and critical of others to completely accepting of who they are. And I tell the people that join Healed Being that the key to stop hurting people you love is, instead of focusing on them to change for you, you accept them exactly as they are. And if you don't like it, you should leave. That's the whole program in a nutshell. I mean, it's not. There's so much more to it. But if you decide to accept the people that you care about as exactly who they are, exactly how they're showing up, everything that they are, if you choose to accept that person, then you would never try to control or change or manipulate them. You would only be concerned with what you want for yourself. And that's what I wrote in my judgment article at theoverwhelmedbrain.com. If you look up the word judgment, or even do a search, judgment in relationships, you'll see my article called Judgment, the Ultimate Relationship Destroyer. And I talk about how if you go from being judgmental and critical and controlling and manipulative and all the bad stuff that you might be towards someone else, if you shift that and become completely accepting of everything they are and everything they do, then they are no longer your primary focus. You are. You are your primary focus. And what that means is, if you don't like something they do, it's not up to them to change. It's up to you to become more accepting or not. That doesn't mean you have to accept everything. If somebody starts doing a lot of drugs around you and you don't do drugs and you don't like it and you don't want anything to do with it, you might not be able to accept that. Or you might be able to accept that they're doing it, but you don't want it in your life, so you're going to make a decision that works for you. You're going to take steps that you need to take so that drugs aren't in your life. That could mean leaving. That could mean talking to them and saying, if you continue to do this, I can't be with you. I'm not saying that you should stop. I'm just telling you, I don't want it in my life. So I'm not trying to control you. I'm just telling you that I would really love to have this relationship with you, but I don't want all these drugs. So I'm going to take care of myself and you need to do what you need to do. So this is what I'm doing. That is the key to stop hurting people. And this works in both ways. The victim of emotional abuse, if you were to accept that person exactly as they are, and you told yourself that's who they are, they're not going to change, what would you do for yourself? And the perpetrator of emotional abuse, if you said that person is exactly who they are, the person that feels like you're hurting them or you really are hurting them, if that's who they are and you know they're never going to change no matter what you do, what would you do for you? Would you continue to stay in this relationship and continue to try to manipulate them or control them? Or would you ask what you want for yourself and take those steps? That is one of the primary or major components in stopping emotional abuse, is taking your focus off the other person and putting it on yourself. What do I need to do for me? Because that person is who they are and they're not going to change. We trick ourselves though, and we say, well, they could change. And I've repeated this over and over again, but I'm going to tell you because it's important to this episode. What has happened in the past will happen in the future. It's the trend line. If the trend line shows that it's been the same for the last 3 years, it will be the same for the next 3 years. That's just how it works. And of course, somebody could change tomorrow. Are you willing to wait every single tomorrow until they change? That's a decision that you have to make. I personally look at it as I'm going to have this conversation. You haven't changed in the last 3 years, and I don't expect that you will. So this is what I'm going to do for myself. And if they said, but I promise I'll change, I'll tell you what, I will change, then I would want to set a date. Okay, if you don't change by this date, then I'm leaving, or I'm going to do something else. So I think it's important to set some accountability, set a deadline, and let them know that this is so important that if you don't do it, I'm not going to tolerate it. Because if you continue to tolerate it, it continues to allow the behavior, and they see that you are continuing to allow the behavior, which causes the behavior never to stop. Which, if you stick around in that situation, you are essentially enabling the behavior. Not that you wanted it, not that it's your fault. It's just when you don't stop something and it continues, then you can be unintentionally enabling it. So I'm going to wrap this up and just read you the last couple lines of the email that this person wrote, because, like I said, I condensed it. It's a little longer than this. But she wrote, is there a way to recognize emotional abuse through these small behaviors, like these little moments of moodiness or impatience, or, like I was saying, irritations and frustrations? How do you respond? How do you remember it's not normal when you're so blinded, in her case, by love and attraction? And I hope I answered those questions pretty much. You really have to address them as they come up, and you really have to ask yourself how you feel about it. When you know how you feel about something, then you can address that. And someone who loves you and cares about you and wants you to feel okay, especially with them, they want you to feel okay with them, they're going to be okay when you ask the question, hey, what you just did, what was that about? Or you sound a little upset, what's going on? They're going to be okay with that because they want it to work out. They want to be with you. They want to connect with you. I realize I'm talking mostly about romantic relationships, but this works in any relationship. You want to find out what's going on in the moment. Like I said in a previous episode, just get the facts. Get the facts. And let me just end with this last comment. And I just want you to take it as a general philosophy of how to look at things. If it's always your fault, it's most likely not your fault. I hope it comes across exactly as I meant it, because what ends up happening in a lot of abusive relationships is that someone will always point their finger at the other person, and the other person always feels like they're responsible or is convinced that they're responsible or at fault. And if that happens over and over and over again, you're probably not at fault. You're probably just trying to figure out how to navigate this difficult relationship, and you can't, because there's a lot going on, and you are empathetic and compassionate and want to do the right thing, so you will probably be more resilient than a lot of other people. You'll be more tolerant because you'll be more likely to accept that it could be your fault, because that's what nice people do. That's what they do. They just accept, well, it could be my fault, so maybe it is. And then when you have somebody who's not so nice, they're going to take advantage of that over and over again. And you don't want that. This is why conversation is so important. And to those who are in multi-year relationships with people, and you have a long history of very difficult communication, this is a big leap for you. You are coming from a place that is very difficult to get out of because you already have an established method of communication. So when you change it up and you start showing a little bit of empowerment, empowered responses, you will probably get resistance, or you'll get something completely out of left field. And it's important that both people in a relationship are able to communicate and also be a little bit forgiving and a little bit allow differences of opinion. Thanks for joining me today. I appreciate you, and share this with others that might benefit. Love and Abuse is the official podcast of the MEAN Workbook, an assessment and healing guide for difficult relationships. Use the workbook to help you determine if you're in an emotionally abusive relationship, and it will give you the tools to help you pinpoint the specific unhealthy behaviors causing you to leave so many interactions feeling bad. If you're in a difficult relationship and you want to know what your next steps should be, the workbook will help you make decisions that are right for you. Visit loveandabuse.com for more information. And if you've discovered that you're doing emotionally abusive behavior and you'd like to change that about yourself, sign up for the Healed Being program over at healedbeing.com. This show exists to remind you that you are not alone and you're not going crazy. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. You deserve honesty and sincerity. You deserve to be treated as worthy and significant. Because you are. Thanks for joining me. We'll talk again soon.